Become a sustaining member of the Commonwealth Club for just $10 a month. Join today.
Hi everyone, I'm Crystal Contreras and I'm Director of Inforum at the Commonwealth Club. Welcome to tonight's program, The Life and Times of Nipsey Hussle with Rob Kenner and Davey D. If you'd like to ask either of our speakers a question during this program, you can do so in the chat or comment section of the live stream that you're currently watching. Finally, the Commonwealth Club has suspended in-person events for the time being, but we are dedicated to keeping you informed during this pandemic. We've gone full speed ahead with the full slate of live online programming in 2021. We ask that you consider donating to the club to help us continue our work this year and beyond. Please visit us at commonwealthclub.org/online to learn more, and you can also click the blue donate button you see on the right side of your screen live during this program. Now, please join me in welcoming Rob Kenner and Davey D to Inforum.
Thank you for that intro, Crystal. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's virtual program with Inforum and the Commonwealth Club. For those who don't know you, don't know me, I'm Davey D, longtime journalist. Some people say hip-hop historian. I'm a good guy, and now an author. So I just put out my own book with Jeff Chang, so props to that. Today, I'm in a conversation with journalist extraordinaire, Rob Kenner. Rob is the founding editor of Vibe magazine and the author of a new book, which is incredible, called The Marathon Don't Stop, The Life and Times of Nipsey Hussle. We're here to explore the late rapper's origins and the lasting impact his music has had on music and culture. And finally, if you'd like to ask us a question, please ask it in the chat or comment section. We'll try to get through as many questions as possible towards the end of the program. So with that being said, Rob, it's good to see you again. And, for folks who don't know, me and Rob been chatting it up for the past couple of months. So we got to know each other. We've been working on a little project we'll talk about a little bit later. But the obvious question that I have to ask is why Nipsey Hussle? And let me give some contextualization to this. Los Angeles is the second largest city in the United States. It's the entertainment capital of the world. If there's any number of people that are there that are worthy of our attention. But I'm just thinking of three big events where I saw the Staples Center filled to the brim with people coming all over to commemorate the death of somebody. I was at the Michael Jackson funeral. I'll never forget that. That was huge. We all saw the live coverage in the Staples Center packed for Kobe Bryant. The third person that we've seen this honor bestowed upon, at least in Black America, is Nipsey Hussle. His funeral was broadcast on numerous television stations, including BET. The attendance was to the brim, like the Michael Jackson funeral. And yet Nipsey Hussle only had maybe one or two albums. I don't know if he won a Grammy. He wasn't an everyday name that we bantered about, but not only did he have that send-off, here we are at the Commonwealth Club, with a packed audience having a conversation about Nipsey Hussle. Why him? What is so special about him?
That's the perfect question, and thank you for that illustrious intro, Davey D. If you say the book is dope, then I believe it. I would say that the answer to your question also is contained in the first pages of my book. I made a decision when writing The Marathon Don't Stop that it was not going to be a book about a tragedy. It was a book about a triumph. And, I didn't want to fall into the cliches of, the whodunit and the murder mystery and, focusing on death. However, there was no place to begin the book other than the memorial service, seeing Lauren London stride to the podium in her white dress.
Lauren, his wife.
Yes, to address the city of Los Angeles and the world, as you mentioned, it was a nationally televised memorial. A lot of people outside of LA don't understand what Nipsey Hussle meant to that city. And Nipsey Hussle's impact, of course, reached far beyond Los Angeles. He understood how to inspire and connect with fans all over the globe. His movement was always global. And I think the answer to your question is also the reason why I had to write this book. He's one of the most important and misunderstood cultural figures in history. And no other artist in hip hop has ever done what he did. I've really racked my brains to think about all the great inspirational heroes that hip hop has given us, all the rags to riches stories that you can think of and that you can point to. Nobody ever did it quite the way Ermias Asghedom did it. Think of someone like Jay-Z. We all know where Jay-Z came from. It's in his rhymes. It's well documented, the struggles that he overcame to become a billionaire and to build this amazing empire that is now Roc Nation. But he didn't build that in the Marcy Projects. He didn't build it right on the ground zero where he came up. To do that defies explanation. To do that defies logic. Why would you put yourself at that risk? Why would you take on all the added obstacles and pressures that come with that? As E40 famously said, hate come with the plate. And it's an unfortunate reality that, getting the bag is one part of the miracle. Securing that bag is a whole other challenge. And, when I spoke with Rallo Styles, Nip's high school classmate, he made it clear that, there's never been a rapper from the heart of Los Angeles who made it as big as Nip Hussle. In New York City, people think of NWA as Los Angeles rap. They're from Compton. Compton is not the city of Los Angeles. And that's an important distinction that often gets lost on those outside of the state of California. Nip was from the heart. He came up in the aftermath of the Rodney King uprising. He came up at the dawn of the death row era in rap. As a child, he was stepping out of his house and listening to, he often said he never had to buy death row records. They were just everywhere. You heard Snoop and Dre and, all the greats, Tupac, ringing out from every corner, from every passing car on Crenshaw. So these are the things that shaped him. And he had a dream to become a hip hop star from his earliest days. He wanted to be Criss Cross when Criss Cross was out. He wanted to be Bow Wow. He was a small child with big dreams, and he made those dreams a reality. And I think that's what everybody responded to. But it is remarkable. And you said, at least in Black America, I don't think anybody other than the three individuals you mentioned has had that honor of the Staples Center. And you think about it, Michael Jackson is the king of pop. He's not the best Black pop star. He's the king of pop. Kobe Bryant probably should be the NBA logo. There's a big movement to remix the NBA logo in his honor. He's one of the best to ever do it. Michael Jordan, is in conversation, of course, and, other people too. But, these are the best of the very best. And Nipsey belongs in that company. He did something different. He was more than an entertainer. He was more than an entrepreneur. He was an activist. He was an inspirational figure. He was a community leader. He was a uniter and not a divider in a city with too many divisions. And, the sense of loss when he passed for everybody that cared about hip hop, certainly in his city, is really indescribable. And the city needed that.
Let's go a little bit deeper into this. And I hear what you said. There's some people that's listening because, you made some pretty strong statements, about, his position in hip hop at the very least. I'm thinking, well, Rakim, and I'm thinking Chuck D, and, there's a long list, right? So I'm sure there will be a lot of people that will debate. But I bring this up to ask, the music industry and the entertainment industry itself has parameters and it has criteria that we start to measure success with. Maybe we don't intend to do it, but we do. Oh, they won a Grammy. That means something. They made X amount of dollars. That means something. I see them on TV. That means something. You start off and you talk a lot about the things that Nipsey did. And these things weren't on TV. They weren't Grammy nominated, although his last album did get nominated for a Grammy Victory Laps. But are we missing something? And is that an indictment on maybe folks who view communities through the prisms of corporate America and its entertainment arm, and therefore we miss the things that obviously 20,000 plus people clearly understood, which is why they showed up so much. And the weeks after Nip's funeral, I mean, there were marches in the streets. I think for a lot of people it's like, how and why? Because you were hard pressed to find a lot of press, a lot of mainstream corporate America validation. And even as we're speaking here at the Commonwealth Club and we're heard on community and public airwaves, he wasn't even in those spaces. This is the first time many people are hearing his name in these spots. So let's talk a little bit about what you laid out that may have touched people in such a way that went over the heads of all of us who were like, I ain't never heard of the guy until the day he died.
So many people have said that to me, and I'm sure you've heard it again and again. Who was this person? I never understood why he was important. Why did he have this? People in Los Angeles, Uber drivers, when I was researching the book, were telling me things like that. And I think the answer is that Nip was never trying to be the most famous rapper. He was trying to have integrity. He was trying to speak his truth without any mediation, without any compromise. And he focused on those people that really tapped in with him and overserved them, and that was the whole genius of his movement. If you think about, let's just take one example of how Nipsey Hussle completely disrupted the music industry. His career coincides with the Napster era, the whole rap model that, Death Row Records, they were selling the Chronic for $19 at CD Warehouse. By the time Nip had a chance to start, putting out music, because he was actually signed to Epic Records when he did the Bullets Ain't Got No Name mixtape series, Quiet as It Was Kept. They made an agreement with him and they were backing those projects. But at that moment, people were able to download everything for free. And so, as he put it, it was like taking off in a jet plane and suddenly you have to fix the plane in midair, and his genius was to say, well, I'm going to find the hardcore fans who really just love my music, and I'm going to communicate with them directly. He was on Napster. He was a very tech savvy kid. He built his own computer. He understood social media way before most people. And what he did was to stay in touch with all of the fans. When he put out his marathon mixtape, you had to sign up at ihustle.com. You had to give your email address, and they would email you a zip file link. So right away, he's in contact with that fan.
Now, we should just make mention, this is a guy who's 17, 18 years old doing this, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I think I want to make sure that people understand this, because a lot of times we're thinking, okay, he's a grown man. Of course he would do this. But when you're 16, 17, that puts it in another stratosphere. And it may raise the question, I don't want to lose your point.
No, I'm with you.
But if it's 17 or 18-year-old kid that is, from a different part of the country and of a different hue, they might be looking at him saying he's a genius. You know, he's the next Steve Jobs or the next Steve Wozniak or whoever is the hot individual. He didn't get those praises, but he was a tech savvy kid that was taking advantage of stuff at such a young age.
And let's be clear,
and a hardcore gang member.
Yeah, well, that came later. That came later, but way beyond tech savvy, he built his own computer. Okay.
Yes.
It's not that he came up with a cool website. He constructed the computer in his bedroom. He found parts. He was asked to leave high school because parts were going missing from the machines at his school. And, you know, whether he did it or not, you know, he was the type of person that you would think, oh, like that might have been him because he built his own computer, you know, like this is genius level stuff. But anyway, his marketing acumen for music has actually changed the music market still to this day. So, you know, at a time when everybody's downloading stuff for free, he says, I'm going to sell a physical CD for $100 a piece. And I'm going to sell it to the most dedicated hardcore fans. I've got them on my Twitter. When I tweet this out, they're going to line up. And sure enough, they did. And people said he was crazy. People said it was ridiculous. He was reading books to get the idea. He was actually inspired by a cheesesteak shop in Philly that was written about in a business book called Contagious that he read, that was recommended to him by one of his mentors. One of the marks of genius is cultivating great mentors and, you know, listening to them and receiving their knowledge and applying it to your generation. So that first night, they sold $100,000 worth of these limited edition CDs. 100 of those went to Jay-Z, who wired $10,000 that first night. And to this day, the music industry uses that model for Taylor Swift, Justin Bieber. They sell their pop records with a bundle. It's called a bundle. And they put the tickets to the new tour in that $100 or $500 purchase. And that's how they make sure that those records go number one. And that's how they sell tickets. So Nip had the idea, I'm going to make an exclusive concert event for my hardcore fans. They get the CD and tickets to a future show for $100. And nobody ever did it before. It's now standard practice. So, you know, this is just one example. He was way ahead of his time.
That exclusivity that we see now, we see it come in the form of, I think, what is it, NTS? And NFTs.
Yeah.
Why am I messing up?
Non-fungible, whatever. Yeah.
So we see people doing that, you know, capitalizing off of the exclusivity.
Mm-hmm.
The only other person I saw do that since we're in the Bay Area, I got to give a shout out to JT, the bigger figure out of San Francisco, was, you know, the person that I saw, you know, take his tapes and his magazine and say, if you want this information on the industry, you know, give me $100 or something crazy like that. And yeah, it did work. But that, again, a genius. In the beginning of the book, you talk about many of his projects. Let's illuminate that. I don't think people realize that Nipsey Hussle early on had a workspace center, very similar to WeWorks. He had one right there in the hood. He was
still there. Still there.
He bought up the mall in his Crenshaw district. Let's talk about these things, because I think that's what people in LA pictured and caught a hold of that the rest of the world didn't. It's like his music is cool, but they understood his impact in other ways.
Right. Absolutely. And this is, again, why I felt it was so important to write this book. You know, as I mentioned, there were not the basic articles ever written about Nip, because his moves were so beyond the rap media. They fell into a zone that was not easily classified. And so people just missed it unless you were there on the ground seeing it happen. It defied easy explanation. But yeah, you know, for Nipsey Hussle and his brother, the center of the universe was the shopping plaza at Slauson and Crenshaw. That was where, you know, his brother Black Sam would be setting up a table along with Fats to, you know, sell just, things that people needed in the community. They knew that their customers didn't have just a convenient place to go get white t-shirts and socks and, things that they knew their local community needed. And every morning they would be out there early doing that. They didn't have a license in the beginning, so the police would harass them and take their merchandise away. And eventually one day, Sam tells the story that he looked up just after the cops had taken all the merchandise and threatened to lock him up, and said, you need to pay rent and pay taxes like all the other businesses. And he looked up and saw a for rent sign on one of the stores in the shopping plaza. So they opened Slauson Tees, and they had their storefront, and, they built it step by step. And eventually, because maybe the people that were their clientele in that neighborhood were on the radar of police. And, we know about the history of this neighborhood. This is the heart of Rolling 60s territory. And, the police were a constant presence, harassing and, chasing them out of there. And so they realized that if they were going to keep this foothold, they had to literally buy back the block. And they found investors. They found a business partner, David A. Gross, who came in and helped them secure that real estate. But, the important thing in understanding this is, my book is called The Life and Times of Nipsey Hussle. And to really understand the enormity of his achievement, I had to look back at what is the history of property ownership in California. Right. What does it mean to say South Central Los Angeles? What is the significance of that term? There was a process called redlining, an official policy which restricted Black families to live in a certain section of Los Angeles. Central Avenue was part of the axis where you were supposed to live if you were of African-American descent. And, to own that ground was everything. Very often it was hard to get loans because redlining was a process where it was very difficult to secure a financing to purchase your home in that area. Right. And owning real estate is the first step to building wealth in America. So if you're paying rent on your home instead of a mortgage, you have very little chance of elevating your family out of, the pressures of life, living hand to mouth, check to check. So, right. Nip understood that at a very early age. I have to say, I'm speaking with the man who did what on YouTube is credited as the first interview with Nipsey Hussle. When you ran into him outside the Get Your Money Right Summit, it was at UCLA, I believe, was it? You didn't know this young man when you run into him. It was a conference organized by Russell Simmons to encourage financial literacy and wealth building. And of course, Nip was there. And you can see a young Kendrick Lamar and J-Rock and the Top Dog fan walking by in the background. It was a hub for the future of LA rap. And you just approached him and said, "Oh, you're an up-and-coming rapper, and why aren't you blinging? Where's your diamonds?" And I know you were asking that in a tongue-in-cheek way, but his response...
He was dead serious. Yeah, he was not playing.
What did he say to you when you said that?
He said something to the effect, man, diamonds don't... He said something about, it's about getting land and having ownership.
He said, all that is cool for the image and the ego, but I'd rather invest in some real estate.
Yeah.
And you said, would you say that again, please? Say it louder for the people in the back kind of thing, And it was amazing to see.
We had a full-on conversation about real estate and its future. I didn't even know who he was. It was like he was a young cat. It was interesting because his answer, he was real serious. Like, you could see this man was like, man, I'm taking my money and I'm going to invest and we're going to do these things. Yeah. Who knew? Who would have thunk?
Yeah. And so part of that too, by that time, I believe he had on the Mariners cap, he had the white tee, he had on the uniform of the hood. And you mentioned before, one of the things, if people knew anything about Nipsey Hussle in, the mid 2000s up to like, the early part of his career before, Crenshaw tape and Proud to Pay and then leading to Victory Lap. That early phase, the only thing people would say with their superficial judgment of him is, oh, he's a real gangster rapper. He's really in the streets. He's really about that life. That was the shorthand that people would say. And he kind of looks like Snoop and got some cool music, but people weren't really listening like they could be. But as you learn, yes, he was financially ahead of his time. He was very serious about building wealth. And, the part of the thing that I wanted to wrestle with in this book is, how does a young man who can build his own computers, who does have all these ideas about building wealth, how does he end up deciding to join the Rolling 60s? What are the series of, decisions that lead to that? And, for somebody that grew up in America on the diet of propaganda and misinformation that we get from the mass media, it's important to get a broader context and understand what do we mean when we talk about gangs, and a lot of the early part of the book is devoted to kind of, placing all of that context so that people understand. Like I learned about a group called the Spook Hunters, which was, a white gang that was out there harassing Black kids on their way to school. Or
with the support of the police, with the encouragement and support of police. Yeah,
exactly. So you had other groups that were called the Slawsons and the Businessmen. And these were Black community organizations that were formed to defend families and defend the kids going to school. So you cannot just talk about gangs in a vacuum. There is a whole, a lot of people had never heard of the Proud Boys until they almost overthrew the government a couple of months ago. They had the news set up on the steps of the Capitol building to catch, whoever they could catch from their Trump hit list. So, like when you talk about gangsters, there's levels to this gangster thing. America was built by cowboys and gangsters, really. So, if you think of it that way, Nipsey Hussle was a young man who was asked to leave high school because he was, accused of stealing computer parts and had to live by his wits. His family wasn't comfortable with him staying. His mother and stepfather were not comfortable with him living in the house if he wasn't going to school. He ended up, staying by his grandma, and he had to make a living somehow. And, a series of decisions resulted from that. And, one of the voices in the book that I'm very happy to have been able to tap into was Dexter Brown, who was like a father figure to him, who took him in at a time in his life when, his future was very uncertain and he wanted to become a rapper, but he didn't have access to equipment, and he would have to ride the bus all the way to Watts to have 1 hour on an MPC machine, right, on a weekend. But, at Dexter's, he had 24-hour access. Him and Rallo Styles and Cuzzy Capone were in there. And that's where he got the name Nipsey Hussle.
So let me just stop you there for a second, Rob, because there's so much to this book that, it's 300, 400 pages, and I just want to make sure that people listening and watching kind of understand some of the things you did here. In the beginning, you lay out all the business ventures that, this gentleman, Nipsey Hussle, is involved in, and it's way ahead of its time. It's centered around buying back your community. Right. And investing, and he's centered there in South Central. And of course, he's expanding this and he's pulling teams of people together, and it's like, hey, I'm a rapper, you're a businessman, you're a sports figure, let's get our money. And he's buying things.
Yep.
So that's important to note. The other thing that you talk about, and you go into great detail, is this history of Los Angeles. And you really go into this history when you talk about the police taking the merchandise of Black Sam, Nipsey's older brother, who you just described, without here filling a need, providing clothing clothing and all sorts of things that were sparse in areas that are essentially food deserts and don't have anything.
Exactly.
I thought that's interesting because you talk about this relationship with the police, and I hope people listening can understand. Here you have folks that are not selling drugs, but selling wears and tears.
Yeah.
And they're the ones that are being targeted by
Right.
the police. Their merch being taken, and they're told, get out of here, go get a license. Not like they were taking business away from a store, but
No.
it was just to contextualize this adversarial relationship
Yes.
with people in the community. And, to fast forward, on several occasions, as Nips is trying to ascend, the presence of the police is always there.
Always.
Even when he's trying to do good, even when he buys the mall, there is this constant, interference and presence of the police. And so I'm glad that you gave this long contextualization of it. So it's almost like a history book in that regard. I'm going to assign my class to it, to
Oh, that
look
would
at
be
it.
amazing. Yeah.
Because I think it's important to know. But let me just ask this. One of the spark points that you also talk about is him connecting with his father, who is Eritrean.
That's right.
And his father, his biological father, coming back into the lives and taking him and his sons out the country for 3 months, and how that sparked the change, how he gets to learn that his country was in a civil war. And can you explain that? I think that's you talk about this as a turning point for him and really clicks a lot of switches. He comes back a changed man and even more determined.
Absolutely. And, that's really a tribute to his father, Dawit Askedom, who stayed in his son's lives, although his marriage to Nip and Sam's mom, had ended. He was determined to keep his sons connected to the culture. And even, in Los Angeles, he would cook Eritrean food. They like to go to Ethiopian restaurants, which is, the neighboring country. And Dawit Askedom came to America seeking, refuge from a 30-year civil war that was going on between the Ethiopian forces and Eritrean forces. And that's a long and complex story that has to do with, the forces of colonialism moving in and, dividing people, and a lot of, complicated divisions. But in any case, he would describe his father as a freedom fighter. And he was very proud of the role that his dad played in the resistance in Eritrea. And so when his dad said, we're going to go back now, we're going to spend 3 months, I think Nipsey wanted to go and Sam probably wanted to go. But it was, 3 months is a long time, right? He mentioned in different interviews that, maybe 2 weeks would be enough, maybe we could just dip in and dip out. But his father was adamant, no, you're going to spend time with your family. He learned the language. He soaked up the culture. And what he talked about in my conversation with him around the Victory Lap album rollout was that, he was for the first time in a country where, all the authority figures looked like him, where family was of paramount importance, where everything stopped for the midday meal. Kids came home from school, businesses closed, everybody had to get together and share a meal. And, there was a tremendous respect for women that really deeply impressed him also. And he started to think about, why are women not as respected in America and in Los Angeles, where I grew up? He said he started to think about his Eritrean, cousins and the women in his family in such a, protective and regal way. He said, like, if anyone was ever to mess with them, I don't know what I would do. But it was a deeply profound experience. And he returned. People who knew him before and after talked about it. When he came back from Los Angeles, he had a renewed sense of purpose. and what, is referred to in many hip hop songs as knowledge of self. That's what he had. And, it reminds me a little bit of Malcolm's trip to Mecca, that, it was a revelatory journey that, another thing that I found very powerful is that, he was already on his music mission by that point. And his father saw that he was also, getting involved in the street life, which I think concerned him. I think that was part of the decision to bring his sons, to another way of life. But when Nip went out there, he had his music and he would play it. He went to a record shop in Asmara in the capital city. And he said, I'm going to be a famous rapper one day. You're going to hear about me. And sure enough, on his next trip back home, as he would call Eritrea, he was a famous rapper and sitting down with the president of the country. And, that last interview that he did for the Eritrean national newspaper is one of the most powerful statements ever. I mean, he was so patiently explaining to someone who really wasn't particularly hip hop savvy or savvy to the life that he was from. He was, as a true cultural ambassador, answering questions like, what is hip hop? And are gangs scary? And, things that, to hear his patient and detailed answers to those questions at that stage in his life, it's very, very powerful, very moving.
The other presence that is there, and he's often talked about that he got his name for Nipsey Russell, the comedian.
Yeah, right.
He's compared to Snoop because they kind of have the same body type, and even sometimes in his early days, kind of similar ways in which they rapped.
It was an influence for sure.
Yeah, but the presence of another influential person who left us too soon, who probably would have packed the Staples Center as well if his funeral was down there. He was cremated, and we're talking about Tupac. Talk about this relationship with Nipsey and Tupac, because I don't think people realize, and then connect that with another person who comes up at the same time as Nipsey and has worldwide impact as well, which is Kendrick Lamar. Right. So both these gentlemen, you talk about in the book at various times, is their relationship, but I did not realize, that he had conversations. So talk about the relationship with Tupac and Nipsey, or Tupac's family and legacy.
Right. Well, it's on the record dedication from the Victory Lap album, the Grammy nominated Victory Lap album, featuring Kendrick Lamar, that Nipsey calls himself Tupac of my generation. And so one of the questions I knew I had to ask when we sat down a few days after that album was released was, about that line, jumps out at you. And, I was at Vibe from 1992 for 17 years. So I had the opportunity to really learn about Tupac's legacy, and we covered his career in great detail, and the triumphs and the tragedy. But I said, that's a big statement, Nipsey, to call yourself the Tupac of your generation. What do you mean by that? That could mean a lot of things. And his answer was very interesting. He said that Tupac was a Trojan horse. And that, he was someone who had a powerful mind and a profound intellect, but he didn't always reveal that. And, he said in our culture, street culture, intelligence is sometimes viewed as a form of weakness. And, you don't want to intimidate people and say, oh, he's smart. We don't want to go with all that, mess, or what. You just don't want to lose people who you hope are going to be involved in the change that you're hoping to make. And Nip said that he identified with that. That was the part of Nip's affinity to Tupac. And in the process of working on the book, one of the most mind-blowing anecdotes that I heard, and I'm going to leave you with a dramatic pause because I'm getting a battery alert from my laptop. So I'm just going to plug into the wall 1 second. Hold on real quick. Okay, we should be good now. One of the most amazing anecdotes that I heard was from Rollo Stiles, who explained to me that before Nipsey Hussle was known as Nipsey Hussle, when he was a conscious rapper going by the name of Concept, he made a track with Rollo Stiles and another artist who's moved between Atlanta and Los Angeles. And this record somehow found its way to the attention of Afeni Shakur. Afeni Shakur heard the track.
That's Tupac's mom.
Yes, the late, great, member of the Black Panthers, a revolutionary figure in her own right. And she decided that she wanted this record performed at a posthumous album launch for one of the Tupac tribute albums that were put out by Afeni and the estate. So long before he was involved in street life to any serious extent, long before he was known as Nipsey Hussle, for some reason, Destiny called him to go, fly from LA to Atlanta and perform at a Tupac event at the invitation of Afeni Shakur. And even in the ride from the airport to Stone Mountain, Georgia, Mutulu Shakur calls from behind
the political prisoner.
Yes, calls from behind bars just to check in and ask to speak with Ermias. He had never heard of this young man. It's not clear why, of all the people who had just flown in from LA, he wanted to talk to Ermias. But that's what happened, according to Rollo Stiles, who was riding in the van. So, things like this are very difficult to process, but, that is how deep it became. And so, you mentioned Kendrick. As you know, Kendrick Lamar had his own profound relationship with Tupac. He had memories of seeing Pac shooting a video, when he was a child. And of course, on his album To Pimp a Butterfly, there's a very powerful recurring motif where he's having a conversation with what turns out to be, for lack of a better term, Tupac's spirit, and he has spoken about Tupac coming to him in dreams. And, Tupac looms very large over, certainly hip hop in general, and particularly in Los Angeles. And so there's a conversation that took place at the premiere of the All Eyes on Me Tupac film, where, it was Kendrick, it was Nipsey, I believe, Snoop was in the convo, and also Top from TDE. We're all in a conversation talking about, future plans and ambitions and, next level ambitions that they had for the city and for how they could play a part in changes to come. And what better occasion than at the Tupac premiere when you're reflecting on his legacy. And Kendrick actually references that in his verse on Dedication. If you go back and listen to it, he's talking about that. But, this is just how profound these legacies are. And the way that they interact is really quite mystical and difficult to explain logically.
The presence of gangs is throughout the book. It plays a role. Key members, the Rolling 60s, which is considered the largest Black gang in Los Angeles, which Nipsey's a part of, is looming. A couple of things come to mind. Considering the constant disruption by the police, it almost seems like that the gangs, in the ironic thing is that if the gangs aren't there, we wonder if Nipsey would even be here, because it seems like they were able to get him, extricated from some of the stuff that he was dealing with. That's one thing. The second thing is, we hear about Los Angeles gangs, and we often hear about these intense rivalries over colors and everything. But Nipsey, with his music and his friendships, and even where he intentionally moves and buys a home, are crossing barriers. So his first home is in a rival gang neighborhood. He knows it's a rival neighborhood, but he's there anyway, not to cause problems, but to build bridges. And can we talk about that? Because I think it's almost remarkable to see based upon the stereotypes that we're often fed, to see that these different factions were able to come together and in a very intentional way and do some long-lasting projects, including, the infamous, I wouldn't say infamous, but the very necessary record, F. Donald Trump, which, was an anthem which featured, Nipsey, a Crip, YG, a Blood, and the Essays, which are the largest, gangs in LA. For people who don't know, they're the most largest, but they're all on these records. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Well, there again, we have to get back to the foundation of, the history of California and understand what we mean when we talk about gangs. And one of my most valuable resources when I was trying to understand that was a documentary that I strongly recommend called Bastards of the Party.
Yeah, great documentary.
Yeah, which really breaks down the the long story of how the Crips and the Bloods came to be. And, it was produced by someone who was from that life and wanted to understand how, I've lost so many friends to violence and incarceration. How did we get here? And his journey of understanding led him to learn about, as I was mentioning earlier, groups like the Slawsons, who were really community protection organizations. And there was an individual named Bunchy Carter, who was the leader of the Slawsons, who ended up being recruited by Black Panther leadership in Oakland to open the LA branch of the Black Panthers. And so you had a former gang leader who became a political activist. And, he was very soon, as we saw in the film Judas and the Black Messiah with Fred Hampton, he was targeted by federal authorities, as with many of these.
Right.
cases.
I should mention you talk very deeply about COINTELPRO and the FBI and all those situations in the book, but go ahead.
No, but that's the thing. I mean, Malcolm X's murder has never officially been solved. I read while I was completing manuscript that it's officially been reopened. And, so all these things, are under a cloud of willful obfuscation and mystery because, forces don't want these cases to be solved. And, but Bunchy Carter, and the LA branch of the Panthers were targeted by the authorities and they were wiped out. J. Edgar Hoover identified the Panthers as the number one threat to America. And, this is a group that was giving out free breakfast to kids and, medical care. And, but they were a threat and they were targeted. And, they also advocated for self-defense. We've seen Donald Trump supporters brandishing automatic weapons in government buildings long before January 6th, but none of them were considered a grievous threat to national security. But when Black Panthers took up arms to defend themselves, that was a different story. So in any case, when we talk about gangs, we need to understand that history. And in the wreckage and the ashes of the Panthers, that's when we saw the Crips rise up and, fill a void really. And unfortunately, it was not the same kind of centralized leadership. These were younger people, and the movement was a little more fractured and it became more neighborhood based. And, we've seen the results of where things led. But my belief is that Nip had, he was very well read. He was very savvy about, if you listen to his rhymes in Slauson Boy Volume 1, one of his early tapes, he's talking about COINTELPRO. He's talking about, the Panthers and, all of these things were very heavy on his mind. And I believe that he wanted to change the direction of the gangs from within. I believe that he wanted to redirect these organizations back to their original mission and purpose. And that involved uniting a divided city. That involved bringing, someone like YG, or even before his friendship with YG, Killa Twan, from Watts was one of his close friends. Nip went to middle school in Watts. His family, his mom was very motivated to make sure her son was well educated. And he talked about, I couldn't always go to Toys R Us, but I
you
could
get a
always
chance, your mic is rubbing on that thing. There we go.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. He said, if I wanted to go to Toys R Us, she might not take me there, but if I wanted a book, I could always get that book, and so she would take the trouble to send her son, not just to the neighborhood school that was easiest, but, if there was a good program in Watts, that's where her son was going to go. And so as a result, he was making friendships around the city, including Killa Twan, who remained a part of his rap crew, in the earliest stages. So he was crossing those boundaries. He was a uniter and not a divider. And that's what the record FDT is all about. That's YG and Nipsey recognizing that. There's a candidate now who's supposedly friends with hip hop. He hangs around with rap moguls and drinks champagne and, whatever else goes on in the VIP room. But he is trying to divide people. He's demonizing Mexicans. He's throwing Black kids out of his rallies. And we don't like that. We're not going to stand for it. And, the unified power of hip hop mobilized the vote to get a Barack Obama, into his historic, presidency. But when the threat of Donald Trump arose, as a sort of, you could argue, a backlash to the 8 years of Obama, hip hop was in disarray, and it was only YG and Nip who really organized an effective response. And although Trump still got elected, as we all know, the song FDT was streamed millions of times on Election Day 2020. So I think we owe them a debt of gratitude for how that election result turned out.
We have a number of questions for author Rob Kenner, who's here tonight talking about his book, The Marathon Don't Stop, The Life and Times of Nipsey Hussle. And watch your mic there, Rob, because it's rubbing up against the thing.
Okay, sorry. Yeah.
So let me read off a couple of questions and you can just kind of go through them. One question is, I'd like to ask Rob his favorite Nipsey Hussle song, or the song that he believes best represents Nipsey. And then the second question is, despite his LA roots, the Bay, where I'm at, really mourn Nipsey's death. I remember murals within the day going up in Oakland. Why do you think he had that connection 400 miles away from Los Angeles?
Well, the murals for Nip were not just in the Bay, but yeah, he had a strong connection to Bay Area rap. I mean, E40 was one of the people that he would always cite as an inspiration. The movement that, was built was Sick With It Records. And even, people forget, but
you're talking about E40's business acumen, because E40 has all those businesses too. Yeah. Okay.
Of course, the same kind of movement and the same, putting out his own product on his own label, owning everything, F the middleman was his mantra. And, people forget, but Master P, started his movement in Oakland, California, or in, what was it? Richmond.
Richmond. Yeah.
Yeah. So, in the same Bay Area. But Nip had so much love, even in cities you wouldn't expect. In Houston, huge support. Atlanta, as I mentioned, it was not only that show with Afeni, he recorded, the whole Crenshaw tape was hosted by DJ Drama. He had real estate in Atlanta as well. There was a lot of Nip's movement was international. He was performing in Japan before he had a record deal. He was flying, doing European tours, self-financed, just him and Fats running around Europe. So, that's why you see the outpouring of love for Nipsey, after the tragedy of March 31st. When you ask about a favorite song, there's so many songs that are not well enough known. There's so many great records. The title of my book, I've had some people on social media say, well, it's The Marathon Continues, not The Marathon Don't Stop. Why are you changing it? And, yes, TMC is a very important rallying cry. And, the Marathon Don't Stop is a line from a record called Love. It's the first record on the mixtape, The Marathon. And, it's a similar declaration. I really like that song, Love. It's love with a question mark at the end, by the way. I think Nip was skeptical about hypocrisy in all forms, and particularly skeptical about, fake people showing him love. And, he didn't want their hugs. And, he knew that the $100 bills he was counting in his drop top and, the pistol that he had to defend himself were real, and he could depend on those. And, this talk of love, he was not too sure about. Of course, he was a very loving father. He was devoted to Lauren London, but, this fake love thing did not interest him at all.
Right.
Another record that I think is really worth listening to is Slauson and Crenshaw, True Story, just because it really is an autobiographical track that lays out a lot of facts about Nip's life that, he revealed what he wanted to reveal. He controlled the narrative, and he used his YouTube video interviews and records like Slauson and Crenshaw, True Story, in order to, tell the tale that he wanted to tell. And it's very powerful and poignant. There's one other that is a hidden track, which is at the end of I Don't Give a and it's often described as Bigger Than Life, where he talks about, again, his philosophy of life and some of the things that he went through. And that's definitely worth listening to. I've made a playlist that I'll be sharing actually, when we do our our Twitch party on Saturday. I'll be sharing a playlist of rare cuts that, I think people ought to be tapped into more. I love the Victory Lap album, and I love, Racks in the Middle and Higher, and the new record with Jay-Z. This Is What It Feels Like. But, there's a lot more music to tap into.
Right. His mixtapes were phenomenal. Let me get a couple of more questions. One, Nipsey often referred to himself as radical in many interviews. What are your thoughts about this? And the other one is, what do you think helped Nipsey become himself? How do we raise leaders like him?
Wow, such a great question. I mean, radical is in the eye of the beholder, right? So, what's radical to one person may be, banal and ordinary to another. It just depends on your perspective and where you're coming from and where you're going to, but I think that when he talked about radical, he meant intellectually unbound, unlimited in his sense of possibility, unwilling to accept the limitations that were placed on him. That's why you mentioned earlier the workspace that he founded in his community. Vector 90 is the name.
Yeah.
I neglected to mention that earlier. And if you think about what that means, a vector, when you're navigating an aircraft, is a point from where you are to where you want to go. The vector is two dots that mark your trajectory. Vector 90 means you're going straight up in the air. It's a rapid ascent. Right. And that's what that's a radical concept right there, isn't it? Even though the marathon is a concept of patience and endurance and long-term vision, and Nip was very proud of having taken the stairs and nobody ever having, helped him get to where he got to, no millionaire megastar co-signing him. He wanted to go straight to the top, and he was not messing around in achieving that. So that's I think what he meant by radical. He was in it to win it without any apology by all means necessary. In terms of how to raise people like Nipsey Hussle, is pay attention to what he was really about. Listen to the music, but listen to the interviews. Read this book. It may sound self-serving, but my motivation in writing The Marathon Don't Stop was really to distill all the things that I found, really radical about him and all the important ideas that he embodied. He always said he preferred demonstration to conversation. So it was about talk about it, not talk about it, but be about it, right? So, actions speak louder than words. And somebody had to put it all down. There's a quote in the record outro off of the Marathon Continues mixtape, which I opened the intro of the book with. And he says in that, when it's all over, all that counts is how the story's told. So write my name down, write my aim down to do this my own way and carve my own lane out. And, I would listen to that line when I was staying up late nights for years writing this book. And, it gave me some encouragement and some endurance. I mean, you're an author also, Davey D. So, it's not a small undertaking. And it helps to have a voice like Nipsey Hussle in your headphones, encourage you to keep going, and I think that was how I was able to finish this book. So, I say I'm answering the question, how to raise, leaders like Nipsey Hussle. Listen to what he was trying to do, pay attention and apply it to your own marathon. I haven't spoken about this much because it just happened yesterday, but I was very humbled and delighted yesterday to meet with a group of professors and graduate students at Howard University who are planning, like you just mentioned, Davey, to teach this book. And I'm going to be part of a conversation at Howard next month, to have an open forum with students there. And these are professors from a multiplicity of disciplines, not the music school. This is everything from, criminal justice reform to marketing, economics, sociology, African studies. There's a whole range of areas that NIP was tapped into. And, that's very flattering and humbling, but I hope that this book can be a contribution to, raising more leaders and more enlightened visionaries.
I think one thing that stands out in terms of how you covered things in the book and just Nipsey's life in general is society likes to narrowcast Black folks. Either we're poor and, unable to have agency, and people take this, I'm going to bestow some generosity on you and take these poor, helpless people to another place, or we're scary and we're the boogeymen and we become political fodder. And when people step out of these bounds, the complexity that we as human beings and just people growing up in America is not allowed. And I think it's important, to understand, he was a member of a gang. And so were many of the people who started this record industry that we admire, right?
100%.
Read their books. They talk about bootlegging and, organized crime syndicates. I mean, we worked in this industry to know, right, that's a presence. And we're not talking about Bloods and Crips. We're talking about a whole other echelon of people who, when you're in the industry, make it very clear where the power rests. And, they're on TV and they're admired. And we're told that these are heroes and sheroes that we need to get behind.
Yeah.
And they're allowed that complexity to come from the dearth all the way to the sweets. And we say the rags to riches story needs to be admired. But the rags to riches stories of the Nipseys of the world are somehow not allowed. And they're discouraged, even though when you're reading this and as you're showing over and over again, and I don't want to give everything away in the book, but I mean, there's a point where he loses every single thing: house, all his music, computers, things that he worked hard for. Police come in, just like they did with his brother, and take everything away. I'm feeling, damn. And he comes back. He comes back, and takes it even the next step. And to me, I think when people hear that part of the story, that's where it becomes inspiring. And oftentimes when people have this conversation, Well, let's talk about the sensational part about Nipsey. Let's talk about did he have rivals? Did he have a fight? Did he have beef? Those type of things. Instead of like, they came into your house and they took everything you owned, including the house, and you came back. Like that personifies that title. And I think we need to uplift that more than ever because everybody else gets it uplifted and we clap and cheer and say, but when the Drake say we started from the bottom, now we're here.
We
want it to be a slogan and we want to remove that from the realities of people who are often written off, and people in his neighborhood were written off. I think the other thing, and this is a question for you, is the connection with family, the street family and his own family. His brother, Black Sam, I think is incredibly important. And I feel his presence throughout that book to the point that I'm wondering how he's able to cope with his brother gone, because he's such a towering figure throughout this book. Right.
Yeah, I can only imagine. But I'm so happy that you zeroed in on this idea of resilience and, overcoming every obstacle in your path. And, as I said before, it was tremendously inspiring to me, even before I knew these parts of the story, just what I did know and the things that I realized that Nip had achieved against huge odds. And the more I learned, the more I was incredulous that, all of the ways that he embodied this idea of a marathon. And, he is truly a one of one. And, you mentioned Rakim and Chuck D, and I'm not going to debate, this isn't a debate about lyrics and, profound art. I mean, he loved hip hop. Nipsey loved hip hop. He was a student of hip hop. And when you talk about, rivalries and who was he beefing with, he didn't get into hip hop to beef. There was enough conflict in daily life. Hip hop was a way to elevate himself, elevate his community. He loved every rapper that could make great music and elevate himself. You would not even sometimes he would go on these shows Viacom has these shows like sort of game show things where you get rap celebrities and try to put them in silly situations. And I've seen him on this one show as him and Ludacris, and they were like, who would you never make a record with? Or, just trying to get silly answers. And he would not diss Vanilla Ice. He would not diss anybody, he loved hip hop and he just wanted rap to win. He wanted rappers to be respected. And, if you could use the art form to better yourself, he was all for it,
Right.
So that part of it is just kind of irrelevant to the conversation. And I don't think he would have said, I'm a better rapper than Rakim or whatever else, but he wanted to be his own authentic self and tell his own story and demonstrate with actions that he could build a career without compromise, not learn dance moves, even though the guy at Interscope Records wanted to practice his dance moves, to do it on his terms, own it, bring up his family, bring up his community. And tragically, his commitment to that community led him to be in that parking lot on March 31st. And
right.
That's the sad part of the story. But, the focus of the Marathon Don't Stop, as I mentioned, is not the tragedy, it's the triumph. And that's the part that we all hold on to. That's the part that inspires us. And that's why we're sitting here tonight talking about it.
And which is why I'm not even asking about it.
Yeah.
We're going to close out. So there's a question that wants to find out about hip hop journalism and what do you think about it? And how can somebody who's a young head excel in it? As you answer that, I'm going to also ask you to give a 60-second response as to what is your 60-second idea to change the world. And somebody asked me a question real quick, which I think has already been answered. How has Nipsey influenced our class that we teach at SF State on hip hop? And I think the reason why I'm having, I'm going to use part of the book is because it gives the history, right? So we need to know the backdrop. this political, social, and economic landscape that is forged by policy, which then, you have younger people coming up in the 70s, both in LA and in New York and in other parts of the country who have to navigate that. It ranges from benign neglect from Senator Patrick Daniel Moynihan, which is then adapted by Richard Nixon, all the way down to local policies in New York with a policy of abandonment, and in LA with a politics of containment, which you talked about, like nobody can leave this neighborhood without being jacked up by the police. And so when you read this, it's you understand the resilience, and you can admire that. And so hip hop is constant resilience. And so we incorporate his story and these other stories of resilience, whether it's Nipsey or whether it's so many women that are involved in others, so that people can understand that you can make a way out of no way. So that's the answer to the question on, how we infuse it in the class. But journalism and 60 seconds on how to change the world as we close out, Rob Kenner.
Wow. Well, journalism is a completely different playing field in 2021 than it was in 1992 when I first became involved with Vibe. The good news is that you don't need anybody to put you on and give you an opportunity to do journalism. You just need to do the work, and you need to break out of the retweet hashtag mindset of social media. And I would encourage anyone that wants to do valuable work in documenting culture to, actually do some reporting, actually talk to people who were part of powerful movements. It could be a yet unknown artist that you're impressed by their work. But it could also be somebody that is an old timer that, maybe other people aren't bothering to talk to, and, do primary research, document what you believe is important, and make a contribution. So much of what passes for journalism at this point, in my view, is just a kind of, clout chasing, retweet kind of mindset. And, without sounding like a grumpy old head, I think it's very important to, look for stories that need to be told and tell them, and use platforms like Medium, the blogging tool that a lot of people read, use social media, but use it to do meaningful work. There's a Instagram account called Ain't No Jigga. I know you've probably checked that out. Whoever is doing that account is using Instagram to do amazingly detailed reportage on specific moments in Jay-Z's life. And that's just one example. But, the medium can be used in lots of different ways. And so I would encourage people, do great work, and it will rise to the top. It will matter, and people will notice it, and just keep going. It is a marathon and not a sprint,
Tell the truth.
Yeah, that's
Be
true.
truthful.
Yeah, truth is an endangered species these days. I want to say something just before I get to how to save the world. The Marathon Don't Stop is an unauthorized biography. That can mean a lot of different things. There are gossip-oriented projects. There's a writer named Kitty Kelly, without throwing shade. I think she was famous for the celebrity tell-all unauthorized biography on various figures. And it was a lot of what we now call TMZ kind of stuff, and, dishing dirt and gossip and whatever. What I mean by unauthorized biography of Nipsey Hussle is that nobody signed off on this. This was not done, it was not officially sanctioned by the family. I should say that up front. I did have a chance to speak with Black Sam and with Nip's sister and a lot of people in his inner circle, but it was also not signed off by the record label. It was also not signed off by, major management and corporate connects and all the people that have kind of, taken their shine of the Nipsey Hussle legacy, right? After someone becomes great, people who joined the movement at whatever stage, like to say that they were, responsible for whatever success. And as you mentioned, Davey, there was a lot of, laps run in this marathon before anybody was tapping in, and he was turning down record deals because he didn't want to give away ownership. So, this is a book which tells the truth to the best of my understanding. And people came forward to speak to me because they heard that it was unauthorized. There are voices in this book who approached me, who I'd never heard of, and said, well, we checked you out and you seem cool, and this is unauthorized, so we feel that you're going to tell the truth and you're going to let a voice like, Dexter Brown be heard from, who has been left out of the narrative and played such a vital role. And there's other examples of that. So, for journalists, don't be influenced by the forces that want to control the narrative as much as possible. As you said quite appropriately, David D., tell the truth. How to save the world? I would say, remember that, as a song once said, one world is enough for all of us, right? We're all astronauts on a planet called Spaceship Earth, and all the barriers of nations and neighborhoods and, racial and ethnic divisions and all the walls that we want to build between one another and divide, the riches and the resources are ultimately going to be our downfall. And, if we don't understand that, fresh air and clean water is in short supply, and, much less food and, clothes and shelter and all the necessities of life, eventually those inequities lead to catastrophe, and if we don't wake up to that fact, and this was something that I believe Nipsey understood very well and spoke about in more than one record. There's a song called Payback that's worth listening to.
Right.
Those divisions, those walls are ultimately going to be our downfall. So save the world. We need to understand that we're all citizens of planet Earth. We're all astronauts on Spaceship Earth. And if we can come together, we could actually potentially achieve a kind of utopia. But the alternative is oblivion, and the choice is ours,
Well, that was 2 minutes and 30 seconds, but
sorry. Well, the book's 400 pages, and I had another couple hundred in me. I cut the manuscript down to fit it in, so I'm not that good at brevity, I guess.
It's a wonderful book. One last thing. Rob will be part of a big celebration of hip hop on Saturday. It'll be a launch party on Twitch. Can you give people your Instagram so they can go to your Instagram and get the information there?
Absolutely. It's at Robert J. Kenner, and the link is in the bio for all the events that are happening around this book. And I'm really looking forward to the Twitch party, which is called Word. In Jamaica, the Rastas talk about word, sound, and power. And, we are celebrating powerful words from people like Nip Hussle, from people like Jeff Chang, from people like Rocky Rivera, and of course, your illustrious host, Davey D. It's a celebration of hip hop, which is, beats and rhymes are made of words. And, so we're going to celebrate the word.
From 10 o'clock until midnight. There you go, all day Saturday. That being said, thank you, Robert Kerner, for joining me today at Inforum at the Commonwealth Club. Everybody that's listening, please be sure to pick up a copy of his new book, The Marathon Don't Stop, The Life and Times of Nipsey Hussle. And if you like to watch more virtual programs or support the Commonwealth Club's efforts in making virtual programming, please visit commonwealthclub.org. So again, please visit commonwealthclub.org/online. With that being said, I'm Dave.